when I was a kid, during the weekdays in Lenore, North Carolina, it was the furniture capital of the world. All your big time furniture people, your companies were located there. And you could go outside and there was a constant hum of furniture factories and trucks, tractor trailers bringing hardware and products in, train cars switching, and then trucking companies that had pickup drivers that would come to the docks and they would pick up completed furniture that had been boxed, and they'd back the trucks up to the dock and they'd load a tractor trailer and then they'd take it back to the company warehouse, unload it, put it in the different sections of where it was going, and then load the long haul drivers according to their stops. And there was, I don't know how many trucking companies in the area. One trucking company ran the northern states: New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Pennsylvania. Another one ran Missouri, Tennessee, Kentucky, Oklahoma, Arkansas. Another one ran the southeast, which was South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Alabama, Mississippi. And so each one of those trucking companies would probably have at least 25, maybe up to 60 tractor trailers leaving out on Saturday or Sunday. And you'd see, we'd ride our bicycles over to one of the trucking companies, because it had a big parking lot, and we'd ride around there and you'd see the truckers loading their luggage and stuff in the truck. And there might be 15 trucks from one trucking company leaving out. And, they would go so far in a kind of a convoy, and then they would switch off. They'd go to different directions. Like if somebody was going to Pennsylvania, then they'd maybe go up as far as Chambersburg and hit Highway 30 and go across. And then the people going to New York, they would keep on going up 81 or whatever. And but it was just tons and tons of trucks leaving out on Sunday. And all of them were delivering furniture products. And it was huge. And the train cars, they would bring in lumber. I mean, some of it even came in from the Pacific Northwest. It had made its way across country. And, furniture at that time wasn't outsourced. You had the lumber yard where they brought it in and they put it in a kiln and they kiln dried the lumber. Then they went to the rough end, and then it went from there to the finished product. I mean, one company did it all. They didn't outsource anything back then. And one company did it all, and when it was finished and boxed, then it was shipped off. And I remember there was a guy in our neighborhood who drove for one of the trucking companies, and he ran New York City. And he'd been doing that for years. And so anyway, if he went into a certain area in New York that they knew him, he would find several people that were winos, and he'd offer them 10 or 20 bucks a piece. Well, back in the 60s, you get 2 or 3 bottles of wine a piece for $10, you know. And they would unload his truck for him. And he'd do his paperwork. And then he'd go somewhere and pick up a back load and bring it back into Lenore. But, I mean, there was all the time some kind of activity going on as far as trucking, furniture production. Furniture production was hazardous in that you had dust bins, and the dust bin would catch on fire from time to time. And as kids, me and Mike, a guy I grew up with, we were really interested in the fire department. We'd go up and hang out at the local fire department, and we had our radios at the house. Back then you had to dial it in. Didn't even have scanners, or if they did, we couldn't afford them. And so when a fire alarm would come in, a dustbin fire or something, and it was in our neck of the woods, regardless of what time it was, day or night, if we weren't in school, we'd take off running toward that fire. If it was a furniture factory, house, or whatever. And the firemen, they all knew us. And so it wasn't anything for us to be standing on the corner knowing where they were going, because they dispatched it over the radio. And I can't tell you how many times at 12 years old, the fire engine would pull up. And back then, you were a real fireman, you rode on the back. You know, it wasn't, you know, you might scratch yourself or something. You rode on the back. And I can't tell you how many times that they would pull up and pull the hose off the back and wrap it around the hydrant. And it had a gated Y valve on it in case you needed to hook up another hose later, and a hydrant wrench. And they'd say, "You got it?" And we'd say, "Yeah." And they'd take off down the road and get back on the truck and take off the engine down the road. And I can't tell you how many times at 12 years old I've hooked up a fire hydrant. And when the engine got down to where they were going, the driver would pull off a couple more sections of hose, uncouple it, put it into his pump, and when he put the hose clamp on, would wave at me. And it was all I could do at 12 years old to pull that, to turn that hydrant wrench. All I could do. And sometimes it took me and Mike both. But we would turn it on. And then when the fire was over with, in a dustbin fire, the dangerous thing about a dustbin fire is there will be particulates all in the atmosphere. You can't see them unless the sun's shining. But if it catches fire, it'll travel down a corridor and a path, because it's almost like solid dust, and it's dangerous. And they would be on that fire for sometimes 2 or 3 hours, because it's hard to get it out. And daytime, nighttime, summer, winter, I can't tell you how many feet of hose that when the fire was over with, me and Mike would break the hose down, and they would be sitting on the back of the engine. The fireman would, drinking a Coke or something, and we thought that was the greatest thing, because we learned to roll fire hose, and we would put it on the back of the tailboard on the engine, and they would take it back up to the firehouse and hang it up on the hose dryer to dry, and they would put dry hose on there. But we did that daytime, nighttime. I've rolled hose 3 o'clock in the morning. It was 30 degrees, and I was 12 years old. We'd get up. We even had our turnout pants. Mike was up at his house, and I was down at mine. And we both had little radios that you could buy at Radio Shack, those realistic things. And when they would dispatch it, day or night, we would take off running, and we'd get there, and we'd have our pants and boots and stuff on. And of course, they wouldn't let us fight fire. We were too young. But we've rolled hose, hooked hydrants. And those were the good old days. And they trusted you, they knew you. I mean, nowadays, if you had a 12-year-old that hooked up a fire hydrant to an engine, you'd be in a lawsuit, and it'd make worldwide news. But it was just an everyday life for us, you know, and it was something we were doing to help. We grew up in a small town. Every fireman there knew us. Every policeman knew us. And if you got into some kind of mischief, then the story of what you did beat you home. And, you know, when it would snow, we would go out walking around in the snow. I can't tell you how many times we've seen cops that were stuck, slid off in a ditch or just couldn't get traction. And we would push them out. And the cops would say, boys, it's too cold to be out here. Get in the back seat and I'll take you home. And they did. I've been taken home by police numerous times, and I didn't get in trouble. They were just giving us a hand because we'd pushed them out of the ditch. And back then, growing up in a small town, you know, everybody knew everybody. And if we were grilled out and the police were riding by on patrol, they'd pull up and roll the window down and say, what time's supper? And we'd tell them, you know, come back in an hour. And they'd say, boy, you're making me hungry. I gotta get out of here. And that was all it was. You know, just a different time. I remember police would ride by and we'd be out playing cowboys and Indians or cops and robbers. And we'd have little toy guns, cap busters and stuff. And the cop would slow down, stop in the middle of the street and roll the window down. And he'd do like that. And we'd point the cap buster at him and shoot him. He'd go on, you know, shoot at him. He'd go on. Now you do that, you'll have a criminal record at 10 years old. And it was just a whole different time. But I wouldn't trade anything for that because, you know, you had trust. You go up to the local drugstore that served chicken salad sandwiches, and a cop might be sitting in there, and you'd walk in there at 12 years old, and we'd have a dollar a piece, and you could get a chicken salad sandwich and a Coke for 75 cents, and they give you a quarter bag. Excuse me. And one of the local cops might be sitting in there, and he'd say, put mine on that little boy's bill right there. And we'd just laugh. And a lot of times they'd end up paying for our chicken sandwich and chicken salad sandwich and walk out. And we'd go to pay for our sandwich, and they'd say, oh, this is already paid for. And just a different time. Well, policemen, it wasn't like they had new cops every other day. You know, most cops had been there for 20, 30 years, and they knew you. And we grew up on trail bikes, and we'd ride the trail bikes in the furniture factory parking lot once the cars left. It was a big parking lot, so we'd ride, and nobody said anything. They didn't care. You know, you're just out there having fun, and nobody bothered you. They wouldn't run you off. Once in a while, we'd get a little wild hair, and we'd take off at 12, 13 years old riding through town. Didn't have license, didn't have a license tag. And, we've been caught probably a dozen times by the police. And there was one captain, and it seemed like he worked all the time, big guy. And his first name was Albert, and they called him Ab. And he knew us and knew our families and stuff, and he never really got excited about a whole lot. And the younger cops that they'd hire, I remember one time on Virginia Street, riding down the road, and I was doing about 30 miles an hour. And right around the curve, I met a policeman. So I pulled in the clutch, turned the engine off. Well, he turned around and pulled me over. And I told him, I said, I was just coasting. And he said, you can't coast 30 miles an hour on a motorcycle. You can't push it that fast. And I said, yeah, I was. And so I said, well, call Ab. And he said, I will. He said, he'll impound that motorcycle. And so Ab, he called him, and Ab was working, came over there. Ab said, what's he doing? He said, I caught him riding a motorcycle on the roads. He don't have a license. He said, I know who he is. He said, I know he don't have a license. And so we stood there for a few minutes, and Ab said, well, he's a pretty good old boy. He said, let him crank that thing up and ride it home, and you follow him to make sure he don't get hurt. And oh, you could see that young cop boiling, because he thought, you know, I've got this one. And Ab told him, said, you ride behind him, follow him so he don't get hurt. And I cranked it up and rode it all the way home. And the cop was right behind me, you know, making sure that I got home safe. And that was just how it was. I mean, you know, if we'd done something really, really bad, you know, we'd have got a lecture and a whipping and had to deal with the cops and stuff like that. But the thing about the cops is nothing that we ever did was something that those cops hadn't done when they were kids, except they probably didn't have motorcycles, trail bikes. But every one of them had been in some kind of mischief as a kid, and they knew what it was like. And they knew your parents, they knew your family. Everybody in town knew your family. Like I say, if you did something, it got home before you did, because chances are the people that worked in the stores knew your family. They went to church with your family. And sometimes if you'd really done something mischievous and mean, you'd a whole lot rather dealt with the cops than your parents, because you got a whipping. And I never got a whipping in my life that I did not deserve. And let me tell you, there was plenty of times that I needed to get one that I didn't get one. And oh man, we had some times.